All right. If you were elected, where do you see Canada in 4 years? And what role do you think you can play to get the country to where it needs to be?
Within 4 years, definitely stabilization of the deficit. In other words, we'll basically eliminate the yearly deficit, but not to the expense of program spending like the other parties would see done easily. There's also the possibility for adjustment of taxes. We can lower taxes on middle class and on small businesses, but we can't afford to do that on large businesses like the Liberals and Conservatives have done in the past, to the point where now they pay half the taxes as what the Americans do. So we don't need to be more competitive unless you want to start comparing us with other third world jurisdictions that have no tax. Well, that's an absurdity, because you don't compare a modern first world country with a third world country. You never do. Or with exploitative countries, large economies like we see in Asia, where they have no environmental rules or worker rules, and there's no unions, and there's no basic wages. People work for 25 or 50 cents an hour. You can't say we're uncompetitive versus these people, because it's not a fair playing. It's not a level playing field, so to speak. Yeah.
What's your long-term vision of Canada?
Well, we're a modern, mature economy. There's people that think we should be growing like the Chinas and Indias of the world, but it makes absolutely no sense to say that, because those countries are coming out from the third world. They're organizing themselves into a modern economy, but we're already at that level. To say that we're going to somehow find a way to create 8 or 10% growth rates in Canada is absurd. We have to manage the maturing growth rates that we're going to have in the future, which are probably going to be anywhere from 1 to 3%. But to do it in conjunction to try to deliver the best quality of life for the citizens in the country. And what we're seeing is we're not delivering better quality of life. Quality of life is degrading. So yet the country has grown in wealth generation, it's grown in population, it's grown in productivity, but the average Canadian isn't seeing it. So that's something that needs to be addressed in the long term. I think we need to rectify about 30 or 40 years of abuses, literally, in that sense. We can all, everybody can prosper in the country, but you can't let the lower or different income groups suffer for the benefits of other income groups. All income groups need to benefit from the growth in the country. I think that's what the NDP wants to manage. We don't want to micromanage the economy, but there are things we can do on the large scale to make sure that everybody gains a little bit.
So again, assuming that you were elected, what would you like your legacy to be beyond your term in office?
Well, I don't know. It's my legacy. I hope to be a very effective MP. I don't want to hopefully not end up in a government, whether it's a coalition government or even a majority government, that for whatever reason gets its hands tied by circumstances that prevents it from implementing its programs. I don't think that will be the case. It's a matter of choices. But there are governments in the past, even NDP governments, that have, gotten into power and then not been ready for it, and then sort of held back on implementing its programs, hoping to do it at a later date. In the one case, we're thinking Bob Rae in Ontario. He came into power at the midst of one of the most severe recessions in Canadian history, and they panicked in front of the deficit, and everything was about deficit cutting at that point, thinking, we'll get a second term to implement all of our neat programs like public auto insurance or child care or whatever other social advantages we think we can deliver for the people of Ontario. But he didn't do any of that. All he did was fight the deficit. People got disillusioned and they voted him out of office, and the consequence of that was 8 years of Mike Harris, which was a disaster. No, I think that under Jack Layton that won't be the case. So I'm optimistic that once we get there, sure, there's a big deficit, but I think we'll manage it. We won't panic with the deficit. We'll begin implementing social programs right now. There's the 100-day promise that Jack has put forward. That's a very good start. And I know that other big ideas like childcare, like a full pharmacare program, are something that we should have a good chance in implementing in our first term easily. And that's big for Canadians.
And and this is really, and you really touched on this is, what are some of the programs you'd like to see the NDP, an NDP government or an NDP coalition government implement during the next session of Parliament?
Well, in the next 4 years, definitely, I think the two big ones would be a childcare program, not necessarily along the lines of Quebec. It could be different from province to province, but where the alleviation of the financial weight on, or the financial burden on people, is equivalent to what they've managed to do in Quebec, which is, the equivalent of $7 a day childcare, whereas in the rest of Canada it's more like $20 to $25 a day childcare. Well, there's ways of subsidizing that, whether through a public system or whether to direct subsidies to parents or whatever, to alleviate that financial burden and encourage people to maintain a quality life for their kids and for themselves.
Come May 2nd, the election comes off. What's your greatest hope? We know you want to get elected, but what's your greatest hope after the election?
Always do better than last time, because it's not just a matter of winning, it's a matter of improving. If you can improve the vote count or the percentages of whatever participation we have at that election, we hope it's going to be a good participation. There's some people saying the participation rate might be a bit low, but with the vote mobs and other groups trying to get people motivated, especially the young people under 30, to get out to vote, we have hopes that the participation rate actually will go up over the 58% of participation rate of 2008. My hope is to do better than last time, but at the same time, hey, if you can win, if Jack is running a great campaign, if we can win and bring home another NDP MP, a lot of people in the riding are not seeing change after years of Liberal and Conservative rule. They're not seeing the kind of change they were expecting. The job creation isn't there, the wages aren't there, and people are leaving the riding. And wouldn't be surprised that in an election or two we have to redistrict the riding again due to population loss, which is a sign that things aren't going well.
Now, you've got a pretty tough riding. I mean, Tobique-Mactaquac has been conservative for a number of years now, and before that it was Liberal, but it was kind of a more. It
was the most right-wing Liberal in Parliament, right?
So how do you think you're going to fare up to that? I mean, you have an older population, traditional.
I definitely respect the traditions. I refuse to do politics during Easter, and that's not just out of respect for the people; it's out of conviction. I hope that people will understand that the NDP is not a bunch of socialists, like I said before. It's really a bunch of disaffected Tories and Liberals. And we just want more of those Tories and Liberals to come to us and support us to offering a third option. Canada can't simply choose between two parties. We see that in the United States, and it's not really a choice. You essentially get more of the same from election to election, and people get really disillusioned, disaffected. But in Canada, we do have options. We have 4 national parties running. And people need to make a conscious choice by informing themselves on the platforms and realize there's real differences out there. Okay, we know the Liberals run from the left and rule from the right, so even though they look like NDPers during elections, they're essentially like Conservatives when they're in power. We saw that during the Chrétien Martin years. The Tories, well, they're run from the right and rule from the right. You pretty much see they're pretty much less hypocritical in that sense. But is that what the country needs? Well, we don't think so. So we're proposing very modest, socially, fiscally progressive policies. And we think that given a chance to run in a coalition government or even as a majority, which is not impossible, that people will take notice. Definitely my main concern, I think, for May 2nd is participation rate.
As you're talking of participation rates, what happens if we have a really low voter turnout?
If it's less than 50%, I think there's going to be a genuine crisis of legitimacy. How big of a crisis? I'm not saying it's going to be a disaster, but there's going to be a problem if 49% of the people vote and then 36 or 37% of those people elect a majority government. That's going to be a problem because it's 36% of 49% or 37% of 49%. It's going to be a problem. We need to have a net majority of people vote, and I would love to see incentives to get people to come vote. It's only every 3 or 4 years, 2 years maybe if it's a minority. But, something I would give $100 off your taxes if you could show up to vote. That's it. Why not? It's reverse nickel and diming.